Scott Harney, Esoteric News, here with Steve Spear, and we're going to take another occult look at the week in the news. And how you doing tonight, Steve?
I'm good. I'm still in Florida. I'm glad I'm here. Yeah. It's sunny, and today was a nice day. So, just and watching the news too. I watched the Kennedy hearing. Yeah. Well, I think I watched most of it. Pretty interesting.
They had a very heated debate between Elizabeth Warren. I don't know if you saw this clip. I'll play it in a second, but
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You have said
you're asking me, Senator. You're asking me not to sue vaccine pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
Look, no one should be fooled here. As Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy will have the power to undercut vaccines and vaccine manufacturing across our country. And for all of his talk about follow the science and his promise that he won't interfere with those of us who want to vaccinate his kids, the bottom line is the same. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it. Kids might die, but Robert Kennedy can keep cashing in.
Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule. I will do that. The only thing I want is good science, and that's it.
How about then say you won't make money off what you do as Secretary of HHS?
Main issue.
Actually, to be honest, that was the way the media is presenting it.
Is it okay? Yeah.
I think she had some valid points. I hate to say it.
That's fair.
I know the CHD people.
Yeah.
If people don't know, they had the Medical Freedom Party thing, right?
Yeah.
And the CHD people actually came after me. I really felt like they were trying to claim the whole movement, and this is something that people do. I think people. I was at a Republican Club meeting yesterday and talking to some people about branding, and how people build a brand. And it's possible you're building a brand. You're Esoteric New York, Scott, which is fine. I like your brand.
Thanks.
One of the greatest branders of all time is Trump, right? Which we'll probably get into. Very interesting.
Sure.
I mean, the way he created this brand. There was, I got a lot of flack from the Kennedy people telling me that, I felt like they were trying to get me in line, and I needed to kind of be a Kennedy person too. This is before, we have to remember that Kennedy went to Kamala first, right?
Right.
Kennedy went to Kamala first. So, what does that mean? I mean, I think there's more to Kennedy. Now, on some levels, I think he's a interesting guy. Like I said, I wonder about hanging out with him, what it would be like. He's a Hollywood guy, though. You know what I mean? And so Elizabeth Warren asked him how much money he was making from his books and from his lawsuits. And are they his lawsuits? That's a question that really, it's a little above my pay grade, but how does this lawsuit work? I mean, and what happens is people claim other people's efforts, and I tell people Kennedy is a corporation, right? Mm-hmm. He's raised a lot of money. He has lawyers. He has media people. Normal, everyday people don't understand that these people are brands. And when they're brands, they have lawyers and they have entertainment people behind them, and they have a machine behind them. James O'Keefe with Project Veritas and now O'Keefe Media Group.
Yeah.
$25 million they raised one year for the Project Veritas. That was their budget. That's a lot of money. Right. I've worked with Scott Pressler. I was speaking to somebody yesterday. I worked with Scott Pressler I'm going to brag, if that's what it is. I'll mention I was one of the best registrar for him. He had a group called Rise Pack. They were registering people. And, it was very, and this is when I first got involved with politics, it was very occluded as to who was making the money and was there money there. And they wanted volunteers. And I'm like, it's good to volunteer. I'm 100% behind people volunteering for nothing for an organization. But the organization should be transparent about where that money is going and how much money there is, if you choose to ask. You're a volunteer. Like I say, the volunteers are the most important people. Really, it's free labor. You know what I mean? And if you, in an economic sense, that free labor adds up. And why are people doing what they say they're doing? What is their true agenda? And I believe Kennedy has a hidden agenda, actually, and I think it has more to do with power than it does to do with. They're not mutually exclusive. I can pretend I'm very altruistic and do altruistic things while having another agenda. And again, I see this as a sort of cybernetic kind of thing. It's systems, it's feedback loops, it's a lot of, and I think people need to start looking at, there's a word, heuristics, right? Where you start looking at, let's go esoteric on it, right? That's kind of the way, let's not look at it as the surface thing. I actually was talking to somebody yesterday or something. I said, I'm a non-surface person, right? I mean, like, I'm, I just wander around. I look like, I like to keep my surface very normal as best I can, because I'm a non-surface person. I operate in an esoteric sort of realm, but I also have to interface with the real world. And so I try to keep my surface being pretty simple so I can be a non-surface person and maybe get into other levels of things, which is what we're doing here, this kind of esoteric look on things that is not the normal perspective. Is it, it's our opinions we're stating here, right? And I think both you and I have credentials in the sort of esoteric world to present these things. We're not just, I hope I'm not just shooting my mouth off. I've done a lot of study. You've done a lot of study in multiple ways. So it's interesting to, to discuss this stuff and look at and try to inform people about the esoteric levels of what's going on,
right,
in what just seems like mundane news. And I wanted to jump into something very quickly because it seems so mundane, and I want to talk about Trump's hair. I think it's really, I was thinking about it the other day, and it's always been there. Trump has this wild, unruly hair, right? And it's notable. It's like, here's this guy, big business guy, but very unruly, very wild hair. And, it's been mentioned, but it's kind of been now sort of just like nobody really talks about it. And there is a esoteric or an occult idea that I think, coming from witchcraft in a lot of ways, that if somebody cuts your hair or and we talked about this a little bit, somebody cuts your hair, it has control. It allows them some sort of control over you.
Right.
Well, you had mentioned something too about the military, Scott. You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the ways. Military. The first thing they do is they cut you here, because that's sort of taking control. It's thought of that, and the same thing with different fascist groups. If they want to control someone,
right,
like the skinheads,
and it's also
and that
uniform,
type of thing.
right? It's uniform is a way, so it's taking away your personality a bit. It's saying, where Trump really has this kind of wild hair, which is very notable and also very fiery in some sense. I mean, it's very
hard to control,
expansive, right? It's not controlled, right? It's not controlled, and I mean, we can go more into that later. Just Trump's personality, how he operates, and we talked last time about him having this kind of like, is he a magician? Is he doing magical things? Really, Scott, if he's and people have said, it's been rumored that he cuts his own hair.
Right, as a magician would, because you don't want anyone to get a hold of
Right.
that link to you, correct?
Right. And even so, there's the one aspect, and I haven't had anybody cut my hair in 50 years.
Wow.
I cut my own hair, and on occasion I say, should I go get a normal haircut? And then I go, you know what? Two things. I don't want to be put under a white sheet by anybody, and I don't want them to have any sort of control. I think famously,
I hate haircuts. I get anxiety when I get haircuts. I don't know why. I hate the feeling of it. It's just Anyway,
I'm actually, Scott, I won't go into it, but I will. I could talk about when people. We know a lot of people, and some people make up fake sort of abduction experiences and things like that. And I could easily. I remember being in a barbershop very young, and feeling like I could create the story that they used to have these little capsules that were like antiseptics.
Yep.
And if you got cut, they would put it on. They were in these giant jars. They were like gumballs almost. Do you remember these, or am I?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And I went to one once, and the barber said, "Oh, you have a cut on your neck back here." And he said, "I'm just going to put this in there." He actually said, "I'm going to put this in there," and he took this capsule and put it there, and then he went like this. Look, it's gone.
Right.
So I can call that my fake implant experience, right? If I care to, And I did have a bump on my neck for quite a long time, which went away when I did a certain sort of magical thing, which I hesitate to use the word magical, but I did a kind of operation, and that went away surprisingly. So I wonder about cutting the hair, is sort of an element. We also have to look at it like with Trump's hair. It's this wild, sort of expansive mass coming off, right?
Right.
It's it's sort of abstract, very, very dynamic in some senses, but not normal, right? It's not like he's not kowtowing to the norm there, which is sort of pretty interesting, there's with politicians, there's a tendency to go for the norm, and we have, and especially in a conservative sort of thing, I would say too. What do you think, Scott?
Maybe it's a good time to bring up the whole sort of conspiracy 4chan thing that's going around this past week about Trump. There's some people suggesting he could be the Moonchild, right, as written about by Aleister Crowley. A lot of it is just circumstantial, obviously, but some people are doing videos on it. And what's your thoughts on it? Because just to remind the viewers, the Moonchild was allegedly part of the Babylon working between Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. That was 1946 to 1947 in the Mojave Desert, right? And speaking right here, Marjorie Cameron was magically came to.
I was going to mention Marjorie Cameron, who's very important. Very important.
And allegedly she was impregnated during the ritual. We don't know what happened to the baby. Some say it was aborted. Some say she didn't have it. Some say she had it and now it's hidden. So we don't know where this Moonchild went. Or is it something not physical? Maybe it was just like a spiritual manifestation in the world. This thing, this portal opened in the Mojave Desert, and it never was closed. That's also some of the UFOologists will say that's when all these UFOs activity began in that area shortly after that magical work.
1947.
47.
When did Hubbard do the? When did Parsons do the Babylon working?
It was finished in 1947, and then shortly thereafter, in the Mojave, there was a number of flying saucers and sort of paranormal activity there. What's your thoughts on that?
Crowley died in 47, I believe.
He died shortly after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Tesla died in 47. Very famously, Roswell was 47, right?
Right.
A lot of people put a lot of, we'll talk about just David Lynch, doing the last Twin Peaks, where the nuclear bombs were very, he supposed that a portal was open through the nuclear bombs, which is a big one for a lot of people. I think in the Twin Peaks movies, that the last one, there's a lot of nuclear stuff. I hadn't watched the whole thing, but there's a lot of nuclear stuff. And then kind of showing the nuclear bomb opening up portals. The 1947, also, I always bring in Wilhelm Reich, right? And,
Sure.
I mean, Wilhelm Reich gets no love, Scott.
Yeah.
Because, and he did I think it was in 1947 that he did the Orenor working, where he put the needle of uranium in the orgone box, and the needle of uranium created a gray landscape over Maine, over Rangeley, Maine. I was up there once and spoke to some people. They went around and said, "Hey, did this really happen?" And they were like, "Yes, it did. We remember it, and my parents remember it." Again, apocrypha. But Wilhelm, and I'll get back to the Crowley and the new Moonchild, but he said it opened up a portal. And then he began to see the cloud busting aspects turning into this kind of biomechanoid UFOs or bione or orgone energy UAPs. And then he started using the cloud busters to shoot them down. I think he has his diary, I'm forgetting the name of it, that he really great. The end of his life, there's something like "What Is It" or something. I forget the name of it, but it's a really amazing of his diaries in his last years, going through like how these UFOs start coming, and he sends it to his friend, his son Peter. For some reason, he's very tight with his son Peter during that period, who's very young. Peter writes the book, Book of Dreams, about his experiences with his father, but also there's the diary of Reich, and I'm forgetting the name, sorry. It's really great, though, because it talks about him going into prison and fighting, which now we're going to loop back to the FDA, right? We're going to loop back to the FDA in a second. But Reich said that he opened an interdimensional portal, and he said it was the term the Cosmic Valley Forge he uses, because he believes he opens a portal and things start coming through. Now, again, we need to look at things sort of holistically, or sometimes I use the word rhizomic, where we're not looking at things linear. So we have all these circumstances in 1947, right?
Right.
And it's very interesting that, and we could probably pick, I'd ask, could we pick any other year and make it fit? I don't know. 1947?
No, 47 was a very unique year, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And 1947 would be numerologically 13 in some regards, right? And I think maybe that even works with the Mayan calendar somewhere, if there's any Mayan calendar people out there. But so one of the things with Reich too, though, and this is the esoteric way of looking at things, is not to go down one rabbit hole and exclude the others, right? So Reich was tortured by the FDA.
Yeah,
the FDA, the FDA had just come into existence, from what I understand, and needed somebody to build their brand, right? They were building their brand. And they spent 20% of their budget on the Wilhelm Reich case because they said that Wilhelm Reich was selling his orgone boxes, orgone accumulators, as cancer cures, right? That's debatable. And it was the only book burning in the United States ever. They burned his books down on by the Holland Tunnel. Those warehouses there on when was it, Greenwich? They're right there, but it was right by the Holland Tunnel. They didn't burn his. They burned all his stock of books. They didn't actually go up to his library in Rangeley and burn them. But it was the only book burning in the United States. It's also a very good account of it is in his diaries, and they came up there to Rangeley and they made him sort of dismantle the orgone boxes, and he had an assistant who was a very sort of a famous assistant of Reich's up in Rangeley, Maine, and Reich had a watch. The FDA walked onto his property and made him take all the orgone accumulators out of his house and put them in the woods and smash them. And Reich had to watch it. So, I mean, it's and there's the what? Sorry?
It's pretty cruel. That's his life's work.
But they were building that brand, right? They were building that brand. The FDA was building that brand, which kind of loops now to Bobby Kennedy, right?
Yeah.
We have this kind of dictatorship of the what is it? The word of sin is restriction, right? And we've been restricted so much over the last number of years, or a political sort of we could Obama, but Biden really, it felt very restrictive, and COVID was part of that. COVID was like the big one, right? Where, and we don't even speak too often about what happened there. It's kind of been this weird brainwashing. But the one thing that makes me think about when I hear about this restriction and how we lived through this really abhorrent administration of the Bidens, right? It was really, really intense. Right. And abusive to the citizenry, you know what I mean? And no governance. There was no governance. It was just sort of abuse. That might be, some of it might be unveiled in the new administration about just how, but things are coming out right now, just how bad it was, and that's going to make me think about the Wounded King, right? Amfortis, right? And the Amfortis and the Wasteland, right? Ezra Pound's The Wasteland, am I right? No, who is it? T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland.
T.S. Eliot, yeah.
Right. So you have, the Wounded King regenerating, and we've talked about Trump's sort of regenerative powers, you know what I mean? As
right.
With the pens and the swords and like this kind of new golden age. But we also have to remember, and it never gets spoken about either, is Trump getting shot in the ear. You know what I mean? Like, that is a wound that does, to my mind, fit with the Wounded King kind of thing. Golden bow sort of, mythology. But, as you stepped away, I turned to the TV and I'm watching Trump sign something. And I've been meaning to look into his signature. And his signature is, from what I've seen so far, 3 very distinct kind of triangle shapes. As he moves along, maybe it's Donald, whatever his middle name is, Trump. But it's you'll find a picture. But I think it's 3 very distinct triangle shapes rising out of his thing. So those triangles can, again, be fire. But just riffing off the top of my head, and I'll be a little crazy here, when Biden came in, his slogan was "Build Back Better."
Right.
A lot was discussed about how the Build Back Better the B's could be construed as 666s, right?
Mm-hmm.
666, Build Back Better, this kind of thing. People were
Right.
playing around with that. And I'm just, as I turned to the TV as you stepped away, and I see Trump having these three very angular things, I'll say that I used to have a big theory, and I won't go into it, Scott, but about angles and curves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how important they are in the bedrock of where we are now, to the point that computers run on binary code, zeros and ones,
Right.
angles and curves, right? And one of the big stories this week too, which maybe I think you've mentioned, we'll talk about AI in the future, maybe, but this DeepSeek.
Oh, right, the Chinese version of OpenAI, yeah.
Right, DeepSeek, and AI being very interesting. I just ordered Neuromancer for somebody. I wanted to send it to them. They never read it. And I think, if we're going to talk about if anybody's going to talk about the AI stuff, they have to actually look back to those kind of cultural things that sort of mimetically implanted the ideas of conscious computers and stuff.
Right. Have you ever read this book by Paul Emberson? It's called From Gandhi Shapur to Silicon Valley.
No. Wow.
Really, this is actually, he's a Steiner guy, and he's talking about So he's talking about the advent, the incarnation of Ahriman, right? And how he's claiming that it's going to happen in the United States and it's going to happen in Silicon Valley. And he's got this, it's a 2-book series, pretty well documented on, because their whole theory was that, world history, it's a balance. The middle pillar is the Christ principle. And then you have Luciferianism, which is sort of, sort of very dynamic, romantic, sort of almost ethereal,
light bringing,
right. And then you got Ahriman, which is this very constrictive, like bureaucratic, materialistic, there's no God type of thing, and they need each other. I mean, the thing is, some people are saying now, like, for instance, the Democrats maybe represent this Ahrimanic principle, which is sort of, we can see that in the fires. In other words, you get this overwhelming bureaucracy, this almost like behemoth of a government. People prioritize physical possessions, wealth, and technological progress over spiritual growth. And it's very tied in with AI and the computers and that type of thing. And then you get the Luciferian current, right? Which is, some may say that could be the Trump MAGA movement, right? I'm not saying this in a negative way, right? But I'm saying, in other words, it's a reaction to, like, in other words, it's sort of reaction to bring balance to this overwhelming, like, sort of, so this would be romantic.
The enantiodromia, right? The Jungian term.
Right.
If something swings one way, it has to balance, so it has to swing back. But that's a sort of that kind of implies a pendulum kind of movement.
Right.
But what you're talking about is, one of the words I use, I want to address is the recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people talk about acceptance. You have to accept something. I'm like, you don't have to accept it, but you do have to recognize it, right? And recognize it, and you don't have to accept it. You don't have to, what we're talking about, Scott. They don't have to accept it, but it probably would benefit people to recognize it as something in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
right.
So again, we've talked about, like, the Ahrimanic thing. I would attribute to Satan and sort of wanting to overturn God's throne, like this vanity of. Then we have the Luciferian stuff, and again, I really think, like, a lot of people throw Satanism out, through Satanism,
right? And
I'm not sure they actually understand what Satanism is and what Luciferianism is and what God is. You know what I mean? And this is esoteric studies. All of them, I believe, are to understand who God is, right, or what God is, what that, like, I think you would agree, Scott, right? I mean, for you, God is probably a primary concern, right?
Right. Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
the
Like,
creator.
I'll
Sure.
the what? Sorry.
Yeah, the creator, obviously, the
Yeah.
source would be
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So exactly, and that's a good word, the source, right? So, there's sources and then there's emanations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these emanations, Lucifer and Satan are emanations of God,
Right.
the big G God too, and
Right.
maybe we'll talk about the big G in a second.
Yeah,
But
that's right. Right.
right,
Uh-huh.
but it's the big G, and so when we talk about, and then we have to actually factor in Christ, right?
Mm.
Who is really in a lot of ways we're seeing a sort of Christian revival going on. A lot of people, because of the oppression they suffered in the last number of years, are actually have been prompted or forced to seek some sort of refuge, and that's in the spiritual world, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and so there is this kind of recognition of the Christian current, right? And I go back to the process church stuff sometimes, and they had in the group in the '60s, very interesting group, came out of Scientology. Very possibly influential in the occult underground of the '70s and '80s. Debatable if Manson was involved, debatable who was involved, but there was Scientologists, and they were doing Lucifer. Was it Lucifer, Christ,
Jehovah,
and
Lucifer, Jehovah, and Satan. That's what it was. Jehovah was in the middle,
Christ
right?
was
Wasn't
in
it?
there, right?
Yeah. Well, that's right. There was Lucifer, Christ, and Jehovah. I thought. I don't think Satan was part of it.
Right, that was it.
I'm pretty
Scott.
sure.
That was,
yeah. And they were big in Manhattan. They had a big office in Manhattan too, a big place in Manhattan at one point. London, a very glamorous Luciferian organization, right? Timothy Wiley.
We should actually just, Scott. I'm going to actually stop and just make sure we get that right. Just
let's see. Yeah, so Process Church,
Trinity, right? Maybe.
Yeah,
it was because it was Christ.
They put out a great magazine too. I have copies.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'll talk about. Do you know Timothy Wiley?
Well, they have Timothy Wiley. Yeah, he was one of the original members. So Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, Christ. There was four. God had four aspects. Yeah. So Jehovah was the stern, law-giving, judgmental God. Lucifer was a light bringer, representing love, beauty, passion, and sensuality. Satan was a force of rebellion, destruction, and primal power. It's really, Ahriman's a bit different than Satan, I think. But then Christ, the figure of redemption and harmony, right? And they believe, like Snyder, they all played a role in our spiritual evolution. Because Snyder didn't say Lucifer was bad or Ahriman was necessarily bad, but they need to balance each other. And they were like forces that the source would use to balance. And one could see sort of the Trump movement as a Luciferian. I'm not saying this in a negative way, because people do have a negative view of Luciferianism, but more of a, it would be more chaos and transformation, which is Lucifer and Satan, right? And then the true enlightenment came from balancing these forces rather than rejecting them.
Well, so Scott, in Jung's Flying Saucers, in Flying Saucers, Jung's book on the phenomena that's seen in the skies, and also I believe in Answer to Job, and also a little bit in Ion, some Jung books. We have to realize that recognize that these numbers are emergent. These properties are emergent, and I've always been under the belief that what Maria Prophetess says, the alchemist, she said out of one comes two, out of two comes three, and out of three comes all numbers, right? So it's not four, right? It's not necessarily four. Jung spoke about the Trinity bringing in a fourth element. One, and even more interestingly, that fourth element was dual. It could be Mary, the feminine aspect, bringing in, or it could be Satan, actually, in Jung's thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, when we balance things, when things get balanced, out of one comes two, out of two comes three, out of three comes all numbers. When we balance things, when things hit that spot, things emerge. New paradigms emerge. I was thinking the other day, things are only esoteric for so long. Then they become exoteric.
Exoteric, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. When the esoteric becomes exoteric, it's not the end of the line. New things emerge. New paradigms, new concepts, new energies emerge. New novelties come out of the abyss in some ways and emerge. And this is how I believe, I don't like to use the word evolve. This is how we develop. I mean? We accept these. I always say it's like we had 2 eyes, then we have 3 eyes, right? Then we have, we're not stopping there. I'm not stopping there. 4 eyes. And then we get into some of the flatlandy stuff, 3 points makes a plane. And the 4th point is in J.G. Bennett's cosmology, which I wanted to bring in J.G. Bennett, who's a Gurdjieff disciple or worked with Gurdjieff. That 4th point is a degree of freedom now. It's a whole new degree of freedom that can kind of move around. You can do mental exercises with it, but you have a plane, 2 points. 1 point is a dot, 2 points is a line. This is flatland stuff, basic flatland stuff. 3 points is a plane. And then the 4th point becomes a tetrahedron or a tetrahedral kind of structure where you have this degree of freedom that is a new paradigm. That degree of freedom brings in something called hazard, right? This is also sort of, I'm going to say Trumpian. It's a degree, an element of risk and hazard. You know what I mean? Where things are not so buttoned down anymore. It becomes like almost in some ways the cosmic Wild West, right? Things are in play, right? Things are in play. Things are moving fast. And that old rigid paradigm is kind of gone. Things are happening. Go ahead, Scott.
No, I think that's right. Regarding these spiritual currents, which is one way just to categorize what's happening esoterically, rather than seeing these people as people, what do they represent? I think that interaction between Trump and then Mayor Bass of LA about the fires was a good example of that, Lucifer versus Ahriman, right? Because she's saying you need 8 months, and then he's saying, no, do it right away. And, And I think part of that Luciferian thing is also there's no limitations. We have Elon Musk, who's now going to save the space astronauts. He's doing something that a multi-billion-dollar government agency, NASA, can't do. So he's going to come in and do that. So he's sort of, there's no limitations for some of these people.
And Scott, again, why is this all happening so fast? It's usually not kind of addressed or recognized, to use that word again. We have the digital thing going on.
Right.
This would not be happening if we did not have these O's and ones. Again, these O's and ones.
Right.
We thought we were in 2. We thought we were in this binary world, and there's a lot of binaries. And then people are opening up to the 3rd aspect in some ways, this balance idea that you were talking about, and balancing these 2 aspects, which creates a 3rd, the thing that connects them. But if we're in that realm of 3, we're actually in 4. 4 is in play. It's kind of like waiting it's the dweller on the threshold. You know what I mean? It's waiting to come in. And it is here. And it is an influence on it. So, there's again this very, I believe that, because of the computer thing, and like some people say that these epochs happen and then there's a rest, right? There's great changes happen and there's a rest. And then we have a new sort of ion or a new, but for some periods are very dynamic. Rudolph of Prague in the 1500s, the Holy Roman Emperor, when he invited everybody to Prague and they developed horoscopes and horology. They developed clockworks. They were doing astronomy, which was linked with astrology. That was a huge change, a huge dynamic change in the way people thought, and also culturally. It was on all levels in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? And now we have, computers have only been around since transistors, 1947, right? Going back to 1947, people talk about like the transistors possibly being like from Roswell, right? But this new media, this which I call the hallucinatory void, where the idea that images are just that. I mean, back in the day, Scott, the classic one on this is Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, right? Where he's talking about how the church colors, that people never saw bright colors in the for thousands of years. It was never, you were very lucky to see something that was super bright, maybe flames. But then that started being kind of codified, and you started having, more and more art being made. And then you have, I think he famously uses about the stained glass windows. And, people walk into churches and they were having epiphanies because they had never had an experience of so many colors presented in their face at one time. Right? You know what I mean? This was a new sunlight coming through, blew their minds. It was, in the non-drug sense, a psychedelic experience, right? And I believe we're going through that same sort of paradigm now with the constant barrage of imagery that we get from all these screens, right? From all these screens. And I can go into my theory about Tezcatlipoca and obsidian mirrors, but I'll save that for some other time.
Sure. So what's your final verdict on the Moonchild, which is supposed to have been a deity incarnation, and it was intended to be a figure of global influence, and sort of Trump's rise to power fits the narrative, as the type of almost like a mythic idea of a sun king, right, with the gold and the hair. Like if you see the book, the fictional book by Crowley, who, by the way, did not support this experiment, right? I mean, he wrote that letter to Grady. Right, by Grady McMurray, basically calling them fools. And that letter was dated Trump's birthday. Remember that? That
really?
Letter right. That was one of the coincidences, right?
Wow. And
he was saying these people are fools and they didn't do it right. And some say that they never banished whatever they called in, and that's how.
There was, we'll just go back through some of those kind of references. Barbara Bush was Crowley's grandmother, right?
No.
Crowley was right. Barbara Bush was Crowley's granddaughter. People had said.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, no, and that was a big meme. And then Hilarion, I believe Hilarion was one of the entities that Parsons and Hubbard. So Hilarion was Hillary, and Hillary was the sort of Moonchild. You know what I mean?
That's okay. So, it goes around.
There's an impulse to like make those patterns fit, and I'm not against it. And who knows? But I'm actually reading Crowley's Moonchild as we just to catch up on that, because a Moonchild in some degrees is an artificial being, right? It's a kind of engineered being, which has always been a kind of alchemical. One of the great alchemical opuses is to create an artificial being. Homunculi is a very is one of those. I'm a huge homunculi guy. I actually wrote in Apocalypse Culture 2, the Feral House book. I wrote about the Teletubbies and the homunculi and genetic engineering. But also, we go back to I think Asclepius. Bringing in consciousness, animating statues through planetary influences to some degree, and bringing in consciousness into which is again a golem. So this idea of AI you know, could we conjecture that, this new paradigm is this kind of cyber creature thing? You know, I mean, we could. I'm not going to go there, but it does need to be recognized that we are in a new paradigm of O's and ones. To be honest, I mean, there's a new chip that my friend Masahiro Okahara was always telling me about called the Memorista. And the Memorista was a new computer, a new electrical component. There were transistors, resistors, and capacitors. I think that's all there were, right? Everything electronic is based on transistors, capacitors, and resistors. And there's a new one called the Memorista, MEMRISTOR, and it's resistor with memory. And they started manufacturing them, and then they kind of went away in a very interesting way. And I would look into memoristas just because, and again, if I go back to my 1, 2, 3 thing, 3 things, and then the fourth comes out of it. And this memorista is a very variable kind of component in electrical engineering. People can look into it and figure it out. But I'm always looking for these emergent sort of properties coming. What's emerging and what's restricting us, I mean? And I see Trump again. I hope I'm like not tooting the horn, but I see Trump as very much an emergent property. I mean? He's really, reinvigorating the landscape. And especially after the 4 years we had, now we find out that the drones in New Jersey were just FAA drones. Why wouldn't they tell people?
Yeah, that's strange. Yeah.
I mean, it's really strange. Like, why just not say? Like, and Scott, is it all about control? I mean? Is it just about controlling the narrative? I might have spoken about it. One of my favorite little things, and I think I mentioned this. I met Terrence McKenna once. We had a private meeting, and I mentioned this to him, and it kind of like blew his mind. There's the logos, and then there's a thing called the muthos.
Okay.
And the muthos is the what Yeats said. Yeats has a poem where he says, "I made this with a mouthful of air." It's just air. So the muthos is before the word becomes flesh. It's the creative act of the verbiage or the breath coming out. And it's not concretized yet. And I'm also, look at Trump as just how vocally sort of adept he is, right? Really vocally adept. We could go back to his Queens roots, and Queens, I believe Elmhurst is the most amount of languages spoken in the world in like X amount of square miles, right?
Yep.
There's probably, Scott, you take the train,
like 180 or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is the most diverse linguistically area, and, on some levels that's, that you put those things together in a stew and something's going to happen, what I mean? And something's going to emerge. And if we wanted to, we could say that like maybe people in Queens have this kind of ability to verbalize because of the proximity towards this diversity, this alchemical mix of things. What I mean? And it doesn't have to be overt. What I mean? Like none of this has to be overt. It happens in the background. Trump cutting his hair. I don't know if he's sitting there going, I don't cut my hair because that's what the witches used to do and I don't have any power over me. Or is he just doing it because there's a sort of an unconscious, subconscious impulse that it feels right. It feels right for the moment. And again, I situational awareness, what I mean? Knowing at the moment, improvising. I'm really jabbering tonight, but improvising in the moment. What I mean? And you're a musician, and I'm sort of I improvise. The idea that you can improvise in the moment is a real skill that is the opposite of the restriction. right? It's the opposite of constriction. You start realizing that things can happen. Things can happen in a moment without it being restricted. And even what I'm doing now, vocalizing, we have this freedom. This is the creative act that we all need to sort of engage in, because the creative act enriches our souls and enriches our lives and brings us closer to God. God wants us to be creative beings. Satan wants you to, Lucifer, we can get into, Lucifer is a light bringer and actually ignites that. But the big G wants us to create. And I think it said in the Bible, be ye as gods, have this impulse to develop. Go ahead, Scott. I'm
speaking of the big G, I think we stand to be corrected. Last week, I suggested that maybe Trump was a Mason, but there's really no evidence of that, right? Even though we do have that photo of him in the Masonic garb, but he is from Scottish heritage. So, but we do know who is a Mason now.
Right. Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, who became a Mason, the day after or the day before he left office?
Yeah, in the Prince Hall, is that what it is?
Right, it's, Prince Hall, which is traditionally African American Masonic order, which is
and the Prince Hall stuff is very interesting. I mean, there is this black nationalism. I think from what the little bit I read about the Prince Hall stuff when the Biden thing happened, I'm a little familiar with people like and I'm forgetting their names. Drew Noble Ali.
Oh, right, from the Moore Sciences, right.
Who on some levels was a Freemason. I wouldn't, I'm going to go out there and say he was probably doing Freemasonry, right?
Right.
And that led to Farrakhan and a bunch of this kind of esoteric
Islam.
Black.
Right.
Esoteric Islam or the numerology stuff, the Moorish sciences, which are very interesting. I think there's a lot to that. There's a lot involved. It's sort of the and I think actually maybe a bit of it came from the Prince Hall stuff, and was a kind of the original impetus to it. We also mentioned Beverly Pascal Randolph, who
big influence.
Who was probably empowered by the Prince Hall stuff to go and do his sex magic stuff, which informed Crowley. And we've spoken about how the OTO has made Beverly Pascal Randolph a Gnostic saint in the last recent history. But one of the things that also I'm going to go and say that, like with Freemasonry, when I think of Freemasonry, I think all the time about the stone that was rejected. That's really that's where I go when I think about Freemasonry, right? It's hewing the stone into a functional, and we have all these stones to build the temple, right?
Right.
But there's also the keystone, right?
Right.
And the keystone, I think the Masons say it's not square, it's not oblong. It's this odd stone that gets rejected. The Master Mason says, "Oh, that doesn't work." I might be getting this a little bit wrong. I'm not a Mason, but they throw it in. They throw it in the rubbish pile, and then they have to retrieve it. And then there's kind of this recognition that that stone is the keystone, right? That allows the arch, right? This and also I'll just go there and say that the keystone was a huge emergent property of architecture. Before there was the keystone, everything was sort of a flat, sort of, and then they realized there could be this dynamic keystone that could create arches and allow architecture to really become something new, or new aspects of architecture. So the stone that was rejected, and this kind of odd, it's not a Democrat, it's not a Republican, it's not an oblong, it's not a square, which goes back to, if I talk about oblong and square, Scott, it's going to go back to my thing about angles and curves, which is way too deep to get into at the moment, but I spent a lot of time considering angles and curves. What is that stone that's rejected? That's not a Democrat, not a square, not a curve. It's Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of odd keystone, the stone that was rejected. I mean, he was gone and back, right? We also, so I mean, I'm going out on a limb there, but I've said is again with Trump with his hair. It's not like he has to hang out with witches, but like maybe he's a self-initiated, a self-initiated magician or Mason, or and that does happen. That does happen. I think self-initiation is probably one of the safest ways to go, because you're working. You can do that in your own cosmology, and you're not under the strict set of rules of some of these organizations that actually lead to creating paradigms in a person's life that isn't truly their path or their, so self-initiation, and, Trump is exhibiting at the moment this very dynamism that might obviously you go, okay, so he's almost a self-initiate. He also, famously doesn't drink or smoke. Right. So, and he's probably not a joiner, what I mean? Like he probably doesn't get involved with, I would say, I think it's, so, self-initiation is a thing, and it's quite possible. So what do you think, Scott?
It's this whole Masonic thing, particularly with Joe Biden. I just find it very curious. Why do you think he did this at this time?
That's the obvious. I mean, the obvious is that he went to a black Masonic society.
Right.
So, I mean, just on total surface level, and I'm a non-surface guy, did it have something to do with courting the black vote, which they've lost?
Right.
You know what I mean? And that just seems a little way abstract. You know what I mean?
But,
way abstract and a real reach on that level. But there is that would be like the simplest explanation.
But he may be excommunicated now from the Catholic Church.
Well, right. Scott, remember these people are these people are very skilled at what they do, and to a degree, we know the Pope is possibly on the way out, because we know how the Catholics feel about this Pope, and the Pope being an activist Pope. So, Scott, like I say, we're normal people. Well, maybe not, but we're sort of normal people, as normal as people are. And then there's people who are very in the game, and they can project a few steps. People say 4-dimensional chess.
Right.
Let's say that you knew you were going to get excommunicated because of your crimes and your views on just a number of things. If there was a rejigging, one of the things to do is you get ahead of the curve. This is like marketing, right? You get ahead of the curve and you say, "Oh, I'm getting excommunicated because I joined a Masonic society."
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? And then that becomes the narrative, right? Like, oh, and this is I could try to dredge up some examples, but this is common. You get ahead of the curve, right? You wag the door, right?
Right.
So maybe he was doing a proactive, preemptive, I'm getting excommunicated, because we know that people like Nancy Pelosi have skirted being excommunicated. Right. And the only reason they're really in there is because the Catholic Church has turned into a much more liberal and political a political entity, where they are not really going by what I'm not a great Catholic, but the fact that going against the traditional Catholic beliefs. Right. You know what I mean? And that's part of what's the PSYOP, right? The PSYOP is install somebody and have that person be I was thinking about it before, Scott, just the word came to mind, elite capture, right? We know about elite capture, right? Nobody's mentioning elite capture anymore. How these people have been captured by certain other entities, and we can, and those entities are myriad, you know what I mean? The CCP would be one, but, also we could say satanic groups. We could say the pedophiles, right?
What do you mean
We
by
could,
elite capture? I'm not sure. This is first for me to hear that. Elite capture?
elite capture is when somebody is compromised in some regards, and by an organization or a group, and then that group sort of captures that, usually a politician or somebody, and elite capture is a form of corruption whereby public resources, elites are people, but political warfare that controls the actions of political, academic, business. It's really interesting, Scott, but I just looked on Wikipedia, and it seems like Wikipedia is changing the definition of elite capture.
Wow.
And well, elite capture boils down to the way power and resources to be distributed within groups. No, originally elite capture was when you capture individuals in some kind of compromising situation, and they become sort of beholden to you, right? Or beholden to that organization, right? And we have to remember too, in a marketing sense, they will change the definitions of words. Remember when they changed the definition of a vaccine, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, Webster, this is a factoid, Webster created the dictionary not as this pile of words, but because he saw the need to have words mean something and to codify those words. So if one person said that word and the other, they knew what that word meant. You know what I mean? It was not, right. And again, you know, so Webster was doing that in a very pointed way to make sure that these words meant things and they couldn't be manipulated, right?
Yeah.
And then, so you know, words, you know, the magical part of words, again, the mythos, the codification of words. When the word is coming out of your mouth or the breath is coming out, or like Yeats said, I made this with the mouth, it's very fluid, it's very dynamic, it's very creative, and then it gets codified. And then when it's codified, you know, I look at the Bible, you know, people who are good Christians and they tell me the Bible, I have to say to them, how many times has the Bible been edited? Who's translated it? We know in the Quran recently, the Quran was never supposedly to have a changed, right? It's always been the same, right? It's never been allowed. But now we know, I don't know if you followed this, Scott, but we know that there were erasures in Qurans, that doing x-rays of old Qurans and finding corrections and changing of words in these sacred documents, right? I always say with a Kindle, you know, that one book every book in the world, if there were 1,000 different books on Kindle, 1,000 different copies of one book, that book can be changed in a keystroke because they're all connected digitally. So if you wanted to start changing the narratives, you know, you could do that. You could go in there and with a keystroke, make the information change. You know, anyway, I'm jabbering. What do you think, Scott?
No, it's interesting. I think with this Masonic issue, this current here, just was an interesting story a couple of years ago from Kamala Harris. One of her aides he was arrested for being part of a Knights Templar Masonic police force. He said it was 3,000 years old, and they had police uniforms, and they were actually doing liaison with the local police, and the local police says, wait a minute, you're not affiliated. So he was arrested for impersonating a police officer. And he was like one of her aides when she was the state attorney general. I thought that was just an interesting aside.
Well, Scott, I mean, but that's so going back to Trump's Scottish roots, you know, we know the Templars went to Scotland, right?
Right.
And that has, you know, I'm going to get a little bold here and talk about Masonic history, possibly you know, the Templars to Scotland, they became sort of the roots of Freemasonry in Scotland, the Scottish Rite at least. I think I told you, Scott, that I went to the oldest Freemasonry lodge, which is in Germany, in the woods somewhere. And I had a very interesting experience there where something was going on, and I kind of went around the back, and I went through the back door, and I kind of was walking around the lodge while something else was going on. It was very interesting. And, you know, and for me, people sometimes ask me, why do I go to these places? I'm not really going there to have an experience. Like, it's not like I'm looking to walk in there and go, oh, bang, have this epiphany. I like my kind of strategy is to collect the energies and then maybe use them later. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel the need to go somewhere and have this epiphany or this like cosmic moment. I'm collecting the energies, kind of integrating them. And then later on I can use them, or I can readdress them, or so that's pretty that was the same trip I went to the Externstein too, and I love the Externstein. Oh, wow. Yeah, that was the Externstein. I highly recommend people going to. But yeah, and then the whole Masonry thing of the Ashlar, the cube, and trying it's I have nothing against the Masons. Some people again consider them satanic. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, it's the big G, and
they're a spiritual group. Yeah.
It's a spiritual group seeking, and the big G, some people say it's gnosis, but I think it's God, but maybe it's geometry.
Sure. I mean? Or the architect, yeah.
Or it could be all of it. Yeah. It could be. It's most likely it's all of it. And it's an initiatory process. I don't think the public really understands initiation either.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The working through certain levels and buying into certain things is really part of it. Deepening into it. Initiation. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I would prefer to think I was self-initiated too. But it is, these, climbing the ladder in some degree of, and deepening one's, initiation would be when the esoteric becomes exoteric in your mind. Those concepts and those become ingrained, and they are no longer these mysterious things. You know what they are. They're almost second nature, and then you're initiated. And then you move to the next level. You take that information becomes part of you, and you move on, right? What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, very good. Now, a lot of interesting stuff this week, and I think we're gonna have a very interesting 4 years. And I think appreciate conversation, and we'll see what happens in the coming. It's only been week 2 in the Trump presidency, so we'll see what happens next week. It's been a pretty dynamic couple of weeks, so.
Yeah, he's really, we'll see where it goes. I'm very curious to see if RFK gets confirmed. My belief is he's going to be the hardest one. Him and Kash Patel will be the hardest ones.
Yeah.
And I actually met Kash Patel for just a moment in Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
And that interesting vibe with him. Interesting vibe. Again, we have to ask how conscious are these people of the roles they play.
Right.
In this kind of archetypal sort of a pageant that's going on, you know what I mean? Like, and it is a pageant, of who's wearing masks? Are they wearing masks? Which personas are they being paid to present? Which personas are they? Which do they actually are they self-initiated enough to know their true selves? To really know themselves. Are they? I mean, on another level. How many of these characters are on pharmaceuticals, mind-altering drugs? Right? Who is so down an alcoholic rabbit hole, or that their personality has been manipulated by substances. And to Trump's credit, I hate to be like this Trump, but he doesn't drink or smoke, famously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he's actually keeping himself pretty clean.
Right.
And substances, psychotropic substances have to be approached very, very carefully. They open doorways and things come in. When you open the doorway, things come in, as Reich did, as Hubbard did, as as these portals, as some people call them. So it's something opened and it came through, right? And
Definitely.
Anyway, Scott, we done?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Enjoy the weather. It's getting nicer here in New York. So
I know it's
anyway.
getting nice. I heard. Hey, Scott, thanks, man. I don't
Thanks a
know
lot.
what
Take
the
care.
hell we talked about today, but this
That was fun.
it,
Thank you.
but no.